The Pope is often seen as the ultimate spiritual authority for over 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide, but what happens when someone else claims that throne? This video isn't about the official line of popes. It's about their rivals, their challengers, their imitators. This is the story of the Antipopes, men who claimed the papacy without the Church's full recognition. It's not just a footnote in Church history. The phenomenon of Antipopes spans centuries, and it's filled with intrigue, schism, betrayal, and even violence. Some Antipopes were reformers, some were political puppets, others were just bold opportunists, but all of them played a role in shaping the chaotic, power-struggled evolution of the Catholic Church. From theological clashes to imperial interference, from the Western Schism to bizarre dual papacies, these figures threw the Church into crisis again and again. At times, there were 2, even 3 rival popes at once, each excommunicating the others, each claiming to be the true vicar of Christ. To make this video, I combed through the lives of every major antipope in history, from early breakaways like Hippolytus to the schismatics of Avignon and beyond. The goal is to bring you the most dramatic, surprising, and unbelievable moments in this forgotten side of Church history. This isn't just a list of names. It's a deep dive into the politics of faith, where spiritual power collided with royal ambition, and rivalries tore Christendom apart. This is the untold story of the Antipopes, and how they challenged the very heart of Catholic unity. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe if you're into untold Church history like this. And in the comments, let me know, which historical pope or antipope do you find most fascinating? Let's see who sparks the most debate. Our story begins in the 3rd century, long before the grandeur of Vatican City or the Sistine Chapel. Back then, the Christian Church was still underground, illegal, persecuted, and constantly under threat. And it was in this raw, dangerous setting that we meet Hippolytus, the first man in history recognized as an antipope. Hippolytus wasn't just some power-hungry pretender. He was a brilliant theologian, a respected priest, and an influential voice in early Christianity. But he had one major problem with the pope of his time: mercy. Pope Calixtus I had a controversial policy. He believed even serious sinners could be forgiven and welcomed back into the Church. Hippolytus, on the other hand, was a hardliner. He saw this as a betrayal of holiness and discipline. So, what did he do? He broke away, declared himself pope, and for nearly 2 decades, the Church had 2 popes in Rome, one preaching forgiveness, the other demanding purity. Ironically, both men would end up dying as martyrs, persecuted under the same empire they once tried to survive within. In a final twist, Hippolytus reconciled with the Church before his death, making him the only antipope officially venerated as a saint. Fast forward a few years to the middle of the 3rd century, and once again, the Church is split, not by heresy, but by the question of forgiveness. This time it was Novatian, a Roman priest and scholar, who stepped forward in opposition. After a brutal wave of persecution, thousands of Christians had publicly renounced their faith to survive. When the violence ended, some of them wanted to return. The newly elected Pope Cornelius said yes. Novatian said no. He argued that anyone who had denied Christ under pressure had committed the unforgivable sin, and therefore had no place in the Church ever again. Fast forward a few years to the middle of the 3rd century, and once again, the Church is split, not by heresy, but by the question of forgiveness. This time it was Novatian, a Roman priest and scholar, who stepped forward in opposition. After a brutal wave of persecution, thousands of Christians had publicly renounced their faith to survive. When the violence ended, some of them wanted to return. The newly elected Pope Cornelius said yes. Novatian said no. He argued that anyone who had denied Christ under pressure had committed the unforgivable sin, and therefore had no place in the Church ever again. So what did he do? You guessed it, he had himself elected pope by a group of hardline bishops, becoming the 2nd major antipope in Church history. His movement spread fast. For years, Novatianist churches existed across the empire. Though eventually condemned, Novatian himself was respected even by his opponents for his discipline and intellect. He may not have been a heretic, but he became a powerful symbol of rigid purity over mercy, and his schism forced the Church to grapple with one of the most fundamental questions of all: how far can forgiveness go? As Christianity transitioned from a persecuted sect to the official religion of the Roman Empire, the stakes of papal leadership skyrocketed, and with those stakes came interference. Enter Felix II, the first antipope installed not by theologians or bishops, but by a Roman emperor. It was the 4th century, and Pope Liberius refused to support the emperor's favored heresy, Arianism, which denied the full divinity of Christ. For his resistance, Liberius was exiled, and in his place, Emperor Constance II appointed Felix as Bishop of Rome. But the people didn't buy it. Roman Christians revolted. They saw Felix not as a pope, but as a puppet of imperial heresy. When Liberius was eventually allowed to return, Felix was forced out. Though some tried to legitimize him later, he was never recognized as a true pope by the church, and his brief rule remains a classic example of how state power tried, and failed, to hijack the church. Fast forward to the 5th century. Rome had fallen, the Western Roman Empire was crumbling, and as political chaos spread, so did uncertainty in the church. When Pope Zosimus died in 418, two men were elected pope on the same day, Boniface I by the church, and Eulalius by a faction supported by the imperial court. Suddenly, the church had a major problem: two rival popes, both consecrated, both claiming legitimacy, and both backed by powerful people. Rome broke into riots. For months, the city was locked in a standoff. Eventually, Emperor Honorius called both parties to stand down, but Eulalius refused. That defiance cost him everything. The emperor stripped him of support, and Boniface was confirmed as the rightful pope. This crisis set the precedent that secular rulers could not dictate papal elections, a lesson that church leaders would spend the next 1,000 years relearning it again and again. By the late 5th century, papal elections had become full-blown power struggles, and sometimes, they didn't end when the vote was over. In 498, two factions clashed over the election of Pope Symmachus. His rival, Laurentius, was declared antipope by a powerful minority, backed by the Byzantine emperor and influential Roman elites. For 4 years, Rome was torn in two. Churches were seized, blood was spilled, and for a time, both popes held parts of the city. Even after Symmachus was confirmed at the Synod of Parma, Laurentius refused to go quietly. He remained a shadow pope, his supporters continuing to challenge Rome's authority until he was finally driven out. This wasn't theology, it was raw political warfare dressed in sacred robes. And it was only the beginning. The year was 903. Rome was a mess. The papacy had become a political prize fought over by noble families and military factions. And in the middle of this power struggle rose a man named Christopher, whose story is as murky as it is mysterious. Some ancient records list him as a legitimate pope. Others classify him as an antipope, having taken the throne by force after imprisoning Pope Leo V. He ruled for less than a year, trying to stabilize the church and continue reforms, but his claim was shaky from the start. Soon, he was overthrown by Sergius III, who declared Christopher's reign invalid and wiped his name from the official papal list. For centuries, historians debated whether Christopher was a true pope or a power grabber. But one thing's clear: in a time when murder and manipulation replaced elections, even the papacy was not safe from the sword. If you think selling indulgences was bad, wait until you meet Benedict IX, the only man in history to become pope 3 separate times, and the only one to ever sell the office of pope for cash. He first took office in 1032, barely in his 20s, backed by a powerful Roman family. He was young, scandalous, and allegedly more interested in women and wealth than in God. Eventually, after public outcry and unrest, he was driven out, but he came back, and then he left again. And in 1045, he did something unthinkable. He sold the papacy to his godfather, Gregory VI, because, get this, he wanted to get married. Yes, really. The transaction was technically simony, the buying or selling of a sacred office, and it horrified church reformers. The scandal triggered a crisis of legitimacy. Suddenly, there were 3 rival popes: Benedict IX, Gregory VI, and Sylvester III, another antipope elected during one of Benedict's absences. The situation was so out of control that Emperor Henry III had to intervene. In 1309, Pope Clement V moved the papal court out of Rome and into Avignon, in what is now southern France. Why? Political violence in Italy, and pressure from the powerful French crown. For nearly 70 years, popes ruled from Avignon, not the Eternal City. This period became known as the Avignon Papacy, and it sparked accusations that the Pope had become a puppet of the French monarchy. 7 successive popes ruled from Avignon, building massive palaces and running the church like a royal court. Meanwhile, Rome crumbled, politically, economically, and spiritually. By the time Gregory XI finally returned to Rome in 1377, tensions were boiling. And when he died in 1378, those tensions exploded. The people of Rome demanded an Italian pope. So, the cardinals elected Urban VI, but Urban turned out to be hostile and erratic. He alienated the same cardinals who had elected him. So what did they do? They declared his election invalid, and elected a new pope, Clement VII, who set up his court, back in Avignon. Suddenly, the church had 2 popes again, Urban in Rome, and Clement in Avignon, each claiming to be the true successor of St. Peter, each excommunicating the other, and each with a growing list of loyal nations. France, Scotland, and Spain backed the Avignon Pope. England, Germany, and most of Italy backed the Roman Pope. This wasn't just a spiritual crisis, it was a geopolitical meltdown. In 1409, a council was called in Pisa to resolve the crisis. Their solution? Depose both popes and elect a third, Alexander V. The result? Now the church had 3 popes, each with their own curia, their own armies, their own supporters, and their own claim to divine legitimacy. The Western Schism was now a global embarrassment. Faithful Catholics had no idea who their real pope was. Marriages, ordinations, and absolutions were questioned. The church's moral authority was collapsing. Finally, in 1414, the Council of Constance was convened, arguably the most important church council of the Middle Ages. Over 3 years, the council worked to end the schism. The Pisan Pope, John XXIII, not to be confused with the 20th century Pope of the same name, was arrested. The Avignon Pope, Benedict XIII, refused to resign and was excommunicated. The Roman Pope, Gregory XII, graciously stepped down, the only one to cooperate. With the slate wiped clean, the council elected a new, and universally recognized, Pope, Martin V in 1417. After nearly 40 years of division, the church was whole again. But the scars of the schism would never fully heal. Trust in the papacy had been shattered, calls for reform would grow louder, and just a century later, they would explode into the Protestant Reformation. From Hippolytus to Benedict XIII, antipopes have been many things: reformers, rebels, scholars, heretics, and pawns. Some were sincere, others were opportunists, but all of them challenged the idea that the Pope's authority is unchallenged, unbroken, and eternal, and in doing so, they forced the church to confront hard questions. What makes a pope legitimate? Can power come from the people, from the emperor, or only from God? And how do you preserve unity when even saints can disagree? This wasn't just a power struggle, it was a spiritual identity crisis played out on a world stage. Before we close, if you enjoyed this journey through 2,000 years of papal drama and rebellion, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives like this. And in the comments, let me know, which antipope do you think made the biggest impact, good or bad? I read every comment. I want to hear what you think.